what we're going to talk about today is what's called the grey list. Okay. Now, strangely enough, I realized this a few months ago that most South Africans don't even know what the grey list is, doesn't know we are on the path to going on the grey list, and doesn't know what it means in terms of their investments. And that's why I decided to do this little seminar. I'm also going to do an article for Fleet Street, if anyone follows Fleet Street. But basically, we're just going to go to the basics here. I'm not going to give you anything that's like super complicated. I'm introducing a topic to you guys. I'll explain the concepts so that most people who don't understand what's happening at least have a basis to like grasp what's going to be happening in the future. Okay. The grey list and what it's going to mean for your investments. Okay. So as usual with these kind of particular, things, let me go to next. Second. I'm using somebody else's computer, so it's not okay. As usual, this is Rand Swiss. What we do is we do a bunch of stuff: trading, broking, portfolios, structured products. By the way, our structured product is closing on Friday, so you still have a bit of time to get into those things. So give us a shout if you're interested. We have an offshore one and a local one. So give us a call if you want to get into those. They close on Friday. There's still time to get in. Okay. Offshore transfers. That's a big business we do at the moment. I know with the rand where it is, may not be a little attractive or very attractive here at the moment. But the one thing I'd point out is just look at a place like, for instance, UK, or look at a place like, for instance, Turkey. We are entering a new period in history when it comes to what currencies look like. And I suspect that we're going to go through a prolonged period in which the dollar is going to be out, extremely strong versus other currencies, including some developed market currencies. The reason being is quite simple: it's most stable economy, highest interest rate on offer for developed economies, and that's going to translate into more demand for dollars. Okay, so we'll do some offshore transfers, especially before the end of the year. Give us a shout. Wealth management, we do that, and tax-free savings account, which, by the way, we are still the #1 tax-free savings account provider in South Africa. So, next. Again, mentioning the fact that we're the top TFSA provider. We won that a couple of years in a row. We also won top stockbroker, advice broker over the last couple of years. We've been either at the top or near the top for virtually every category, but it's important for a company like ours, a stockbroking, financial planning, advice kind of company, portfolio management kind of company. We are either near the top or at the top for all those categories. Okay, so last year I think we won top overall broker, we won TFSA broker, and the People's Choice Award as well, which means that clients like us. So thank for that. And I think almost done here with the spiel. Yeah, here's some stuff about who we are and so on. And I know you guys know about this stuff because that's why you're here. And again, how do we do it? Overall, we were the top broker, and you can see the difference between us and number 2 for instance, tax-free savings was quite large, much bigger than, for instance, the difference between 1 and even like number 4. When it came to, give me a second here, People's Choice Awards, we won, ahead of Easy Equities by more than Easy Equities beat either number 3 or number 4. Or even looking at that day, even number 5. So basically, the difference between number 5 and number 2 is less than the difference between number 2 and us. So we were quite far ahead. So yeah, we are, well known as, in the industry, and as you can see, we have some good awards. Okay, there'll be new awards apparently coming through quite soon, and we'll keep you informed as to whether or not we place in those ones as well. Okay, so here comes to today's agenda. After all that marketing, what we're going to discuss today is a couple of things. Firstly, what's FATF? Okay, what is grey listing? Why are we in danger of grey listing? How likely is it to occur? And what does it mean for your investments? That's what's going to be the main crux of today's thing. Feel free to ask questions about any particular topic here. We are trying to introduce the idea to clients, to customers, so they understand that this is something on the horizon, and there's something you have to take into account looking forward. Okay, and here is a quote from Tolkien, okay, that I think is appropriate here. It does not do to leave a live dragon out of your calculations if you live near him. In this case, the dragon is grey listing. It does not make sense if you have a financial stake in South Africa, if you're doing investments and are a South African citizen or resident, not to consider grey listing, okay, if it's a possibility. because it will impact a lot of what your life as an investor looks like. So you have to understand basically what this means, at least factor it into a certain extent into your calculations as to where to make your investments, how to do your investments, you know. So let us start off. What is FATF? Now, FATF basically is the Financial Action Task Force, okay? It's anti-money laundering and terrorism. It started off in the late 80s, early 90s as money laundering. After 2001, like everything became also money laundering and terrorism. I mean, for those that don't know, the reason that we leak our cards, our little cards on our cell phones is terrorism. After 2011, one of the reasons that we have FICA is terrorism. So after 2011, that was a very strong motivating force for organizations globally, bureaucracies globally. And, you know, it actually includes the part of terrorism there. And why is that important? Because, you know, when you say anti-money laundering, there's a certain kind of like stigma in the world. When you include terrorism there, there's a different level of that. You know what I mean? So what you have is penalties, we have difficulties in terms of, you know, moving money across. In one, it's like it's a white collar crime. The other one is like, you know, you are a traitor to the country. There's a very different kind of scale of punishments that come along with that. And the fact of the matter is that since FATF has this laundering and terrorism components put together, often you'll find punishments being more, you know, strict than you would think logical, or requirements being stricter than you would think logical for a anti-money laundering thing. But when you consider the fact that they're also saying that they're also fighting terrorism, that gives them that extra kind of whoosh to basically push things through. Now, as with all bureaucracies, by the way, I mean, if you have to go back and look at, for instance, when the Federal Reserve was created in the US, and when income tax was introduced overseas and in South Africa as well, these things usually start small and they gain power. So FATF started off with a limited lifespan, so it wasn't meant to be an ongoing thing. But I think in 2018 or 2019 became open-ended. That means there's no end to the lifespan. It's an ongoing, continuous organization. There's 200 members plus here. That includes countries and what they call jurisdictions, you know, Gibraltar and those kind of places, okay? So this is the kind of organization that we're dealing with. It's a bureaucracy that's grown more powerful over time, includes virtually the entire world's countries and jurisdictions. And what the aim of it is to enforce universal standards for anti-money laundering laws and enforcement. Why is that important? Well, one of the key powers that modern governments has is to know where your money is and know what the money is doing and know where money is coming from and going to. So, for instance, if you live in the UK, you live in Europe, you live in the US, okay, and you have any substantial amount of money, the government has a pretty clear idea of where the money came from, it has an idea where you spend it, has an idea what you're doing with it, where you're storing it, okay? And why is it important? It gives the government more power when it comes to basically enforcing rules, enforcing laws, monitoring bad behavior. A weakness to this is that if you have access to other continents, other countries, other jurisdictions where they don't have as much control over what's happening to money. So if you take your money from, for instance, the nice, well-controlled, well-monitored EU, and then move it to Nigeria for a couple of years, and then bring it back to the EU has lost track of that money, doesn't know what's happened to it, doesn't know whether or not it's accumulated some dodgy funds there, doesn't know what you've done with that money that may not be in line with their rules, okay? And therefore, it's easier for these big countries, big jurisdictions to monitor flows of funds and so on if everybody follows a similar level of rules. That way, if you go to Nigeria and you buy stuff and you sell stuff, the Nigerian government will have records of what you've done so that the European governments can find out what you've done, and they have a track. They can't just say, oh, suddenly Viv Govender has $20 million. There's no idea where it came from. They went into the casino. Did he basically kill an elephant and sell his tusks? Basically divide it in the street? All those things are unknown. Or did he make it like in a normal business transaction by investing? Did he pay taxes on that? Those kind of things. If you don't have basically a nice little kind of bubble in which everything occurs, if there's a gap in that bubble where something can go out and come back in, the rest of that bubble basically is worth less. If you don't have the ability to monitor flows of funds in other countries, the money can flow back and forth between your country and that country, then you lose track of where the money is in your country. Okay, and so one of the rules that one of the, of course, the punishments for having a country that doesn't want to follow these rules is you just cut them out. Oh yeah, you don't. If our citizens' money go in or out of your country, money flows out of your country to our country or back and forth, and we're losing track of everything that happens. Guess what we do? We stop the money transfer between our country and your country, and that is what FATF basically is able to do. It creates these bubbles of like kind of where inside which there's a garden in which everything is kind of manicured and kind of controlled, and make sure that there's no access to the wilderness out there. Wilderness being places where money is not tracked, where inflows are not tracked, where stuff is not recorded. And that is the purpose of it. And you can understand why, like the powerful countries in the world want to see that, because that's where the tax law comes from. That's where their revenue for running the country comes from. That's where the power comes from to a large extent. Okay, so what is greylisting? So now we know what FATF is, or what FATF can do. FATF is this country, this organization that basically tries to spread around. Question? Yeah, Eric is correct. Asked the question: would it make it more difficult to maintain foreign investments? Maybe not maintain, but make new ones, maybe. Because remember, what they're trying to do is they're trying to control the flows. Okay, they're trying to make sure that money that comes in and goes out is controlled. So if the money is already in something and it's already invested somewhere and you've got a record of it, and it doesn't basically go into a jurisdiction where there's like, unknown stuff happening, it'll be easier. However, if you're starting new flows coming in, where's that money coming from? Who's bringing that money in? What's as taxes being paid on it, etc. So yeah, it will make it more difficult, but it's primarily about newer investments as opposed to maintaining your current investments. Okay. Okay. So what is greylisting? Okay, there's two lists. There's a grey list and a blacklist. Okay. On the blacklist at the moment, there's just two countries. There's Iran and North Korea. Maybe Russia might join them soon. This is who runs it? Basically, this is run by the G7, started off by the G7. So we're talking the US and Europe basically run this thing. And, obviously the bigger countries play a part, but it's a bureaucracy. It's like the UN. It's like one of those kind of things where, it started off by these powerful countries, but every member has some input. But basically, you'll see when it comes to who actually make decisions, who actually empowers it, it's the G7s that was the core start of it. Apologies. Sorry. Okay, apologies for that. Just put this silent. Sorry about that. Okay. So yeah, as you can see by who basically are the sanctioned bodies who runs this thing. So there's two countries right now on the list. That's Iran and North Korea. So those two countries basically can't operate like normal. They can't have investments out of Iran into Iran as usual. You can't, that's one of the reasons, for instance, MTN exited Iran because they couldn't get the money out. North Korea as well. So you really can't, as a North Korean or an Iranian, invest right now. And for instance, that's one of the reasons that SpaceX is able to go and put its satellites in or get satellite communication, internet into Iran, because it can basically ignore Iranian law. In most countries, for instance, you can get a satellite dish in South Africa that picks up SpaceX, but you may not be able to use it. Why? Because the frequency required to use that SpaceX dish is controlled by the government. The government doesn't give a license to SpaceX. That's the law. If SpaceX wanted to do it and wanted to ignore South African law, it could do that. It's doing that in the Ukraine at the moment because the Russians say, you can't do that, but the Ukrainians say do it, and there's obviously a jurisdictional thing here. But even when you are in basically the Russian territory in the Ukraine, you can go and use the Starlink satellite system from SpaceX because you ignore the Russian demands, because you ignore that law. Iran, North Korea, they're out of the system. Exclusion from the global financial system. When you're in the gray list, you are halfway between clean and the blacklist. That's the idea of the gray list. So it's halfway between being green and blacklist. Okay, so that means you're gray listed, you're monitored. You're not at the point at which they're basically saying you are out of the club, but they're saying you are on the borders and we are going to watch you closely. Okay. You're at danger, not really, but I mean, you could really go pretty far to be blacklisted, but there is greater monitoring and greater due diligence. And you would be blacklisted if you just said no. Okay, for you to be in the gray list, you've got to go and try and appeal to basically stay on the gray list or move off back into clear. Okay, and remember when I said that the FATF wants to basically have an international set of rules to monitor money laundering? The way they do this is by making sure that countries that are on the gray list or definitely on the blacklist find it much more difficult to operate. And so when a country is on the gray list and possibly maybe looking to move to the blacklist or on the border of becoming gray listed, what's going to happen is business entities, the rich people in the country, the financial, whatever, even the political elite, because remember, it's all money flowing in and out of the country. So for instance, Iranians and North Koreans really can't go out and do stuff overseas. They can have billions of dollars locally, but if you're an Iranian billionaire and you want to go and buy a house, for instance, in Los Angeles, it's not going to happen. If you're a North Korean, there's a funny, passport thing where they showed that apparently the previous leader and his son, the current leader, once took a trip to Disneyland with the fake passports. But again, not easy. Okay, they could obviously buy more stuff, spend more money if they were given more freedom, but they're kind of locked out. So when you have this gray listing thing, blacklisting thing in, it's going to be, the rich politicians that can't spend money overseas. It's going to be the big businessmen that can't invest overseas, that can't transfer money back and forth. It's going to be investors that can't do stuff. Okay. What does it mean for startups? Rather open up offshore? In all likelihood, yes, because you probably find it easy to raise money. So if you are going to be looking to raise funds, etc., you really would find it easier to start from scratch offshore if we are gray listed. And we'll talk about that in a second. And obviously, if we are gray listed and don't become off the gray list down in time, but it's going to make it more difficult. I mean, you try and raise funds, all the transactions that are coming in and out of South Africa are going to be looked at with greater scrutiny. I mean, it's going to be more difficult for investors to put money in and take money out. Okay, not as bad as the blacklist, but it's going to add an extra level of complication. And sometimes it's all that's required to stop people from investing. Okay, hope that helps, Andrew. Okay. So, exclusion from the financial system. That is the main stick that they have here. And that stick is really powerful. Because think of it, right? Imagine that a rich black businessman like Patrice Motsepe, okay? He has billions. He would like to spend money, for instance, doing lots of stuff out there. Maybe he wants to go out and, buy Arsenal, or like Dangote wants to buy Arsenal. Now, if you get gray listed, it's more difficult because how do you transfer the funds across? There's more scrutiny, blah, blah, blah. And so he'll go to the president and say, hey, I'm big shot in your country. In this case, I'm your brother-in-law. I want to basically make sure that we are not gray listed. And there's going to be the kind of pressure that politicians face along the way. And even politicians themselves, like I said, their wives, themselves, their kids can't travel overseas. They can't spend money overseas, even if they have it, as easily if they're on these lists as if they're not. So that is what gray listing is. It's this kind of in-between space between, hi, Dan. Just see. Do you want to do it in Q&A or do it in chat if you want to put your thing down there? Okay, if not, email me, me, and I'm going to answer it afterwards. Okay, so that is what gray listing is. It's this in between blacklisting and like the normal stuff. Blacklisting, like I said, is for the most extreme countries. Like effectively, you're out, you're gone. Okay, gray listing is a little bigger, and I'll show you the list of gray listed countries at the moment. Okay, so here are the list of gray listed countries at the moment: Albania, Myanmar, Barbados, Nicaragua, Burkina Faso, Pakistan, Cambodia, Panama, Cayman Islands, Philippines, Gibraltar, Senegal, Haiti, South Sudan, Jamaica, Syria, Jordan, Turkey, Turkey. I know there's a new name, there's new pronunciation, but I'm sorry. Mali, Uganda, Morocco, UAE, and Yemen. Okay, those are the countries out there. Now, what you notice, I mean, none of them look like extremely attractive developed countries except for the possibility of Turkey. Okay, so Turkey is the one thing that we'd say, okay, comparable to us. And look at Turkey's economy at the moment. It's just, in shambles in terms of just what's happening with the inflation rate. The inflation rate in Turkey, by the way, is I think it's like 80%, 80%. Okay, the country is, I think the currency went from like 3 lira, 3 Turkish lira to the dollar to something like about 18 to 19 at the moment. I'm not sure what the last number was in the last 6 years, from 2015 till now. Okay, 6, 7 years. Weakened by more than 6 times. Okay, that's the kind of stuff that we're dealing with here. Pakistan, Pakistan, state sponsor of terrorism, that kind of stuff. Myanmar, they've been accused of literal genocide, actual genocide. This fleeing people from Myanmar. The Philippines, I mean, a large economy, large country, but I mean, watch what's happening there with, I think Marcos's son is back in power there. And the places, Duerte, who, again, really extreme. Jamaica, Haiti. I don't know much about Jamaica, but I know Haiti's in pretty big trouble ever since those earthquakes and even before that. We're talking about a great list to be on. Okay, the UAE, I'm surprised by that, but that could be to do with the fact that we are seeing money flows that are not accounted for properly, and that could be one of the things that are the problem there. So this is the list of grey list countries. Now we are not on that grey list yet. So what's the actual thing is now? Last year they came and said, "Hey, we don't like what you're doing. We think you are a bit dodgy. Okay, we're not meeting the standards that we want to be meeting. We're going to review you for a year." So from last year October to this year October, so next month, they'll review. And I think a decision will be made start of next year, February. It sounds like a long period of time, but remember, we're dealing with these massive bureaucracies. FATF is this like, parastatal, big above government bureaucracy. Okay, it moves very slowly. It has a lot of power, but it moves very slowly. It has all these kind of steps it has to take before it does anything. So, for instance, when you get on the grey list, it's probably going to take at least 2 or 3 years to get off it if we do everything right. So that's another thing. So if we do get grey listed, okay, it won't be a case, grey listed this month and not grey listed next month. No, it's grey listed this year and maybe not grey listed a couple of years later, even if everything is solved. Okay. Why are we in danger? Okay. Well, basically, they came here and they said our laws are not strong enough and the enforcement is lax. So there are loopholes in the South African legal system that allow you to do certain things that can hide where money comes from, who invested it, who gets the benefit from that money. Okay. And remember, basically, what FATF wants to control, it wants to control the flow of money. It wants to know who has what money, who's paid taxes on it or not, who's basically gotten it from which source or not. You know what I mean? That's what it wants to do. That's what the control is meant to do. And in South Africa, we had certain rules that allowed you to go and, for instance, be a director at a company, even though you have like a history of doing some dodgy dealings, or run an NGO, even though, again, you've broken some laws in the past. Have trusts that allow you to hide who the beneficiaries of the trust are. All those things kind of make it more difficult for those big countries. Look, it's true. There are definitely rules in Africa that make it more difficult. As Andrew said, he agrees with the findings, that make it more difficult for someone to track where money comes from and goes out in South Africa. Okay. And what's got to change is we've got to change these rules to make it more. I mean, the big things, we read through what the changes are. They're mostly about finding out who are the beneficial owners of assets, number one. And the second thing is to make sure that people who are specifically broken some rules or broken some laws or on some kind of, of their own particular kind of thing, are not allowed to run important institutions, okay, or have influence on important institutions. And finally, as well, there's some stuff about influential people versus politically important people and that kind of stuff. But again, making sure that the people that are moving money back and forth are effectively not politicians that are changing the laws or corrupt and whatnot. That is what all these laws are about. Okay, that's primarily what the changes are here. It's just tighten down so that government knows better who does what and who the money belongs to, can actually penalize companies for breaking certain rules. Okay, and like prevent certain things from happening. So that's what it is. Give the government more power to know stuff and to do stuff. Okay, like I mentioned, the focus is on beneficial ownership and control, the ability of government to step in and bar certain individuals from operating. Also, collecting information, again, about who controls what and where the money comes from and goes out to. Giving government increased power to sanction entities. So if you do something that they don't like, more power is there. You can't make that decision. You can't do that thing. You can't employ that person. You can't work there. That kind of stuff. Okay. And finally, and this is the important thing, is enforcement. So if you can go and change all these rules, that's one thing. But if you don't show the enforcement behind it, that's a problem. And guess what's the problem in South Africa? We have lots of nice little rules. Does the government also follow that? Not always. So enforcement is another aspect to it that I think might be one of the big sticking blocks when it comes to whether or not we are meeting these standards for international anti-money laundering laws. Because we may have the laws in the books, but we also got to show that the laws are being followed. Okay, so how likely is this to occur? Well, so we have government is changing laws. So that's done. Okay, so the laws are going to be changed, they're going to be pushed through. Nobody is out there trying to stop government from doing that. Okay. The thing is, enforcement is still an issue. So, for instance, you saw the recent arrest for the Transnet guys, and for the ESCOM guys, and for all the other stuff happening here, maybe even the moves against the Guptas. It's quite possible that there's behind the scenes maneuvering by government to avoid these sanctions, to avoid this grey listing, to avoid this extra scrutiny, because or by basically punishing people that are obviously criminals. ESCOM guys, obviously, allegedly, I'm going to go on, so obviously, but allegedly because of the Zondo Commission and so on. But punishing cases or taking these high-profile cases off the burden, basically making sure that these people are being arrested and there's some kind of sign that there's enforcement happening there. That could be one of the reasons that we're seeing this enforcement, is because of the fear around grey listing. Grey listing is very important in terms of a motivating factor to make people, or make countries rather, act in the right way. I mean, Mauritius, for instance, was grey listed for a couple of years, and many point to the fact that the grey listing forced the government, gave it the political incentive to go out and really clean up some legislation, clean up some rules, and clean up enforcement, and actually made the country better off at the end of it. So it's not entirely a bad situation. It could quite likely be that we see South Africa in 2025 or 2030 or something like that there as a better country because we were grey listed, and all those entrepreneurs were basically arrested, and all the stuff, the dodgy dealings happening at ESCOM and happening at Transnet and SAS and SAA were dealt with because the government basically had to do it, because if they didn't, then we would lose our clean status and we would have difficulty transferring money in another country. Okay, so that is the one possible benefit of being grey listed here. Okay, on the other hand, for an individual, it's going to make your life more difficult, because you are going to be basically sitting in a situation where if you want to do something, an international institution that looks at you is going to look at you a slightly different aspect as what they did in the past, or they would look at you if you were not grey listed. Okay, that's going to make it more difficult for us to open accounts. And I mean, for those of you that have been dealing with us the last few months here, it's getting slightly more difficult to do things, right? We're asking you for more documents, we're asking you to sign things again, we're asking you to basically do wet signatures and stuff like electronic in certain cases. And that's because we're getting feedback on our end as to what's required by those institutions. And why those institutions want those things is because they don't want to be messing around with their regulator. They don't want to have trouble with their regulators. So they say, oh, let's just be extra careful in South Africa, and therefore we're going to be putting more administrative burden on ourselves and on you to make sure that these investments basically go through as they should. Okay, so just understand how that path works. It doesn't even have to be rules in place, right? Just that extra fear causes more difficulty down the line. Now, like I said, enforcement's a real issue. Government is changing laws. That's pretty much on the cards. So is it possible to avoid grey listing? Definitely possible. Is it likely? I don't know. I'm getting conflicting statements from people that should know. I mean, I don't have access to what's happening behind the scenes, talking to this international body and our South African government, and that's the negotiation happening at the moment. So I don't know about that. What I do know is we're getting statements from, for instance, the Reserve Bank saying one thing and from the Treasury saying another. Okay, the Treasury seems to be more pessimistic, the Reserve Bank seems to be more optimistic that we can get away with it. Okay. But I do know that the fact that we are on the verge of this grey listing is going to make our lives a little bit more difficult. And if we are grey listed, it will make our lives even more difficult. Now, we're being evaluated next month, and we're going to get a decision by the start of next year, February, I think is the date. Okay. So that's going to be basically by when a deadline happens. Cool thing about this is that we have a end of calendar period in between. Okay, so between now and February, there's a year end happening. And why is that important? I'll discuss that in a second. Okay. Yeah. So basically, when we have these kind of international things, the sanctioning happens across the board. Nobody wants to be dealing with a tainted institution because it taints you. So if you basically are dealing with a tainted country, a tainted institution, you become tainted. Okay, and so that applies across the entire financial system. Okay, and so the fear of dealing with something tainted have excluded. I mean, I know for a fact that certain banks in Africa don't want to deal with certain jurisdictions in Africa because of the fact that there's, the possibility of tainting money coming through. I know for a fact that certain banks in Africa don't want to deal, for instance, with a lot of Bitcoin transactions because of the stuff coming through with exchange, like Luna and so on. So those kind of things make your life more difficult as an investor, but also make your, make this thing have even more power, because what it does is it gives power to suggestion, to the possibility, as opposed to just breaking the law. If you understand what I mean? So the taint itself of the possible, breaching of standards, whatever it is, even though you may not have done it, is enough to basically taint you in the eyes of institutions. And for those guys, I mean, we're not multi-billionaire, dollar billionaires coming from South Africa often. Often these are smaller accounts, these are whatever, they like more like run-the-mill accounts. Even like someone with like say 50 million rands is like at the moment less than a $4 million account. 100 million rands is like probably like a $6 million, $7 million account. Okay, it's about six at the moment. So not huge clients. Why go to the extra hassle? Why have the extra difficulty in your life? Just say no. And that is the kind of fear that will happen around gray listing as it goes forward. Okay, so next. What does this mean for you and your investments? Now here, I'm going to be very wishy-washy, okay? Because again, I don't have a clearer insight into this than most people do, okay, or the government does. I can just say what government statements are looking like, what financial professionals that are looking at, like the legal people behind the scenes are saying. And some are saying it's not going to be a big problem. It's already priced to the market, blah, blah, blah. Others are saying it could be worse than a credit downgrading from here. I do suspect that it depends on who you are. What do I mean by that? If you're a huge investor, you're talking about tens of billions of dollars, right? In South African terms, that's basically hundreds of billions of dollars, even billions of rands. Okay, that investor, a bank internationally, will probably take a bit more care. He's probably going to say, "Oh, yeah, this is a big investor. He's bringing in like tens of millions, if not hundreds of billions of dollars. Let's go through the extra trouble of making sure that we do the extra steps to make sure that he is onboarded here, or we take the risk of bringing him on board, blah blah blah." For a normal investor, hell, maybe not. Oh, we're getting all these 100,000, 200,000, maybe $1 million accounts from South Africa. These clients, yeah, not really worth the extra hassle, not really worth having to fill in those extra forms about dealing with a South African entity because it's grey listed, blah, 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 blah. And I think that is the kind of situation that we're going to be dealing with if we are grey listed. It's going to be either no big deal for some people and a very big deal for others. We talk about raising funds, okay? You might be more difficult. There may be certain institutions out there that don't want to deal at all with basically any South African entity because of the possibility of realistic. It's like, for instance, if you had to start a fund in South Africa, a private equity fund, and I said, hey, do you want to go and put some money into, for instance, the DRC? Nothing wrong with the DRC. I mean, there's definitely activity happening there, huge potential and incredible opportunity for the future. But certain investors out there, especially in for instance, pension funds or whatnot, might say no. Some more conservative, for instance, in certain kind of group schemes and whatnot, will say no, because it's more dangerous for them to basically invest there and to justify any losses there or any difficulties there than it would be to invest, for instance, in New York or London. Well, if there's a loss, you can say, hey, it's New York or London, not my fault. In the DRC, they say, oh, yeah, you made a wrong decision. So I do think it will be a problem for certain people. It will definitely be a problem for smaller investors bringing in new money. Okay, what do I mean by that? Let's just say you open new accounts. So, for instance, you have an account in South Africa, and you want to, like, next year, say sometime after February, and we are grey listed. By the way, I don't know for certain if it will be or not. Right now, it looks to be either or, but I'm tending to think that we might be on the side of grey listing, just because of the fact that enforcement is an issue here. We are not going to be facing that enforcement or doing that enforcement as well as we should be. Okay, but come next year, let's just say you have some money you want to take overseas, you want to open an account to invest, for instance, in international shares. You come to us, and then choices are going to be opening a full-on international account or trying to do something via a local bank. It's going to be more easy to do it via a local bank next year, because the bank is going to have this huge amount of funds, and it's going to be vetted by the international entity as a single entity, as opposed to looking at all the individual small, rights and mice kind of clients, title clients. At the moment, if you open an account, you're not going to face as much scrutiny. If you have the account open and the money in there already, okay, like I said, we aren't breaking any rules. We aren't at a point in which we are going to be sanctioned. It's just going to be the case of, do you really want to deal with the extra hassle of dealing with South Africans? You get my drift. And I'm saying to you, if we are grey listed, those international entities are likely to say no, not what to bother. Okay, I mean, in South Africa, can you imagine, like, Standard Bank, for instance, saying no to certain flows from places in Africa that are like Somalia, for instance, or something, even though Somalis may not be breaking any laws, just because they don't trust the financial system there and it taints South African banking, and there's not much money coming in. No, just leave it aside. The same thing might happen with regards to grey listing here. We don't need to be sanctioned. We don't need to be given a law that says, oh, don't deal with South Africans. The fact that we are tainted, the fact that we are, viewed with this kind of thing, might be enough that it discourages banks from doing business in South Africa. You already saw, like, some international banks pulled out branches from South Africa recently. It was not worth the effort. I mean, one of the reasons Barclays exited ABSA was because it wasn't worth the financial and regulatory headache of having ABSA on their books. Okay, not to say anything ABSA was doing was wrong, not to say anything ABSA did was illegal. Just the extra regulatory and other aspects around ABSA made it more difficult for Barclays to operate, not worth the effort. And that's the kind of thing that we're going to see right now. So what should you do if you are scared about this grey listing process? I would suggest establish those accounts now. Transfer the money now if you can, okay? But at least establish the accounts. Once those accounts are open, you can put money in when you want to. You're not going through the whole due diligence process from scratch, which, like I said, might be more difficult next year than it is right now. There might be more requirements as to what we need to put in, regarding your assets, regarding your tax payments, regarding your transactions. Open the accounts now, before the end of next year. And if you want to transfer money, guess what? Like I said, we have a calendar year end coming on 31st of December. In South Africa, a lot of our offshore allowances reset at the calendar year end. So if you and your wife, for instance, want to put in $1 million each, 2 million rands this year, and 2 million next year, you could put 4 million rands into an offshore account that you created this year before February next year. Not to say you couldn't do it afterwards, but I'm saying it's going to be likely more difficult to do it afterwards. Okay. But even if you had a need to transfer money next year, like say after the February deadline, when we are possibly grey listed, at least you have an account to transfer the money to. It's going to be receiving funds. We can go through all the normal due diligence stuff to say the funds are fine and been received. We don't need to have as much. Okay, let's just go down. So I'm just going to, another question came, I didn't see that. Yeah, what would be the bank outcome if you bank with international banks like Citibank and Santam? Would they fall on the same scrutiny? I'm suspecting they would. I'm suspecting that Citibank is going to find itself maybe a little less interested in having South African business than they did in the past. And you've seen big banks leave South Africa, so you probably want to be dealing with an international account that you have, already created out there. And even if you don't have like that scrutiny coming through from international bank, Citibank in Santam, it's also, I say, if you don't have Citibank pulling out from Santam, the fact that you have an account open at Citibank now is more interesting. Try and open an account next year, it might be more difficult. You see what I mean? So having those accounts available now is better. And I would prefer, quite frankly, to at least look at the possibility of having a direct offshore account opened now, and hopefully transferring money now, but even transferring money like some now and some next year and into the future, because that's going to make it more easy for you to operate. Imagine, Andrew, if you basically are dealing with a bank with more scrutiny, the fact that you have an account open now, you've done business with them for a while, you're going to be having an easier time operating with them than you would if, for instance, you open an account for the first time next year, June. Okay, does it make sense? So, yeah, that is what I think we need to, sorry, I need to close these things down. Yeah, we do open offshore bank accounts. That's obviously why I'm talking about this so much. I'm trying to push our business here. But we do open offshore bank accounts. We have a relationship with a company called Swissquote. We open Swiss bank accounts for your clients. These come along with basically full-on stockbroking and banking services included. What do I mean by that? I mean, the Swiss system is a little different from the English system that we are used to operating. The Americans operate with the system. We operate with this system. The English operate with the system, but the Swiss system is a little different. In the Swiss system, your bank account includes a stockbroking account, an investment account. And because they are so interlinked here, you could go, for instance, put a couple $1 million into a stockbroking account, buy some shares. And if you want to go spend some money, you can go and use a debit card, which you can get for that account, by the way. Your stock account has a debit card. You can use the stock that you have in your account as collateral, obviously to a sort of percentage, like 50% or so on of the value of that stock, and go and spend money on that debit card based on that. Okay, so it's you can do offshore transfers. You can, yes, you do chat with me. Just give us a shout after this, and I'll get in touch, and I'll basically allow you to do things. So Andrew, so anyone else that wants to just give me a email, you know, my email viv@ransfors.com, or contact us, and we'll be more than happy to help you with these things. Okay. Second, I'm just trying to scroll up here. Okay, cool. All right. So, like I was saying, second one I was thinking. Okay, so you have these accounts overseas. You have them open. You have them viable. They can do what you want to do. They are normal bank accounts. Okay, these give you an access to funding when you're overseas. If you have money already there, you can spend that money. You can take a debit card and go buy stuff without having to go some of the hassles that you have locally. Because that money is already in the Swiss system, it's seen more clean. It's been more clean, and you want to do something with that money. It's easy to do something with that money. Okay. I really advise South Africans to have like these options open to them. Now, again, I'm not in the, you know, who the guys I'm talking about, the people that believe that you have to take all your money and go to Mauritius and that kind of stuff. In fact, I don't like Mauritius as much. Because this is going to be a bit of a out kind of thing here, but just go with me for a little bit of a while. I think at the moment, everyone here can agree that the world is more uncertain than it was, say, 6 years ago. Everyone fairly agree with that, right? 2015 and 2022 are totally different time periods, okay? We've had troublesome times in our lives before. 2008, 2009, we had troubles, okay? We had troubles basically in the East Asian crisis, end of the 1990s. But can you remember, and anyone here remember, a time where we had troubles in so many different areas at the same time? Where you had wars, and you had pandemics, and you had, okay, the pandemic is that thing, but wars, you know, stuff around after I'm back to the pandemics, supply chain issues, commodity crunches, and also, you know, rising interest rates and financial issues at the same time, and falling stock markets, all at the same time happening. My argument to you is that we are entering a more uncertain period in human history. We've had an incredibly long period of 70 years from the end of World War II till now, where things have been very quiet. But look before the end of World War II, it was a very interesting world. And we could be entering a period of more interesting stuff happening. We all know about Russia and Ukraine, but I mean, obviously, there's also China and Taiwan. And China is a proper country. Like Russia is a large country, but China is, you know, rivals the US in terms of size. Taiwan makes the world semiconductors. Ukraine is nice for sunflower oil and for, you know, some of the stuff it makes, but does not make the foundation of the modern technological world, which is semiconductors. Okay. China, Taiwan is a real issue. Okay. Now you may say to yourself, that makes no sense. Why would it even be that crazy? Who would have thought that Russia would be this crazy? Honestly, who would have thought that? Who would have thought the US would have been that crazy, invading Iran, invading Afghanistan, and spending, what is it, $8 trillion, okay, on those things. So these kind of things happen, okay? If you're looking at a more uncertain world, where do you want to be? Do you want to be in the middle of Europe in a banking system that survived World War II and functioned properly throughout the whole thing, even though it was in the middle of a war zone and was next to like one of the big players, which was Germany? Or do you want to be in a little island off the coast of Africa? That's Mauritius, on an island in the middle of Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore, that has no, that's Singapore basically, that has no, defenses against any of these bigger neighbors. Do you want to be in South America? Okay, no. The safest place to be for a South African investor is Europe, Northern Europe. One of the best places to be in Northern Europe is Switzerland. Why? Think of it this way. When Cyprus had an issue, remember Cyprus had an issue a few years ago, what did they do? They would have took a cut of investments by international investors in their banks. Your deposits at a Cyprus bank, Cypriot bank, as a foreign investor. The government comes and takes a part of that and goes, says, okay, we are basically confiscating about 10% of your money. Why? I'll come to Malaysia and Mexico just now. Confiscating 10% of your money. Why? Because you have a situation there where the financial system was less important than the rest of the economy. You had a short-term thing, go and screw the financial system. No one wants to open a separate bank account anymore. Doesn't really matter because, the rest of the economy can function. The Swiss system is much more dependent on the financial sector. They are not going to be willing to sacrifice it basically as easily as some other places in the world would be willing to sacrifice their financial sector because they know that that's one of the main sources of their advantage in the world. Okay, so you can have money that's safer. And again, unless we have a total collapse of the world order, Switzerland survives. But there's many scenarios where Singapore doesn't survive, where basically Mauritius doesn't survive. A question here, two M's, Malaysia and Mexico, two different things. Malaysia, it's a very uncertain country. Ethnic tensions do arise here, but it's next to some very powerful neighbors like Indonesia. It's also in the middle of a zone that will be in trouble if there is a conflict between, for instance, the Americans and the Japanese and the Chinese down the line. Okay, so Malaysia, obviously not as bad as being basically, like, for instance, like Mauritius, which is alone and much smaller, but it is small. It's not a large country, and it has its own issues, ethnic issues as well. And it has basically this possibility of being in the middle, already close to a war zone. Okay, it could be like comparable to, like, say, Poland is right now, not in the war zone, but next to it. Okay. Mexico, on the other hand, has a different kind of situation. Now, one of the reasons I prefer Switzerland as well is the ability to operate in English. Okay, very easy to operate in English, very easy to read the rules. We have people that we know can speak there. Mexico, obviously, there is the English component. We can do the help the Americans, but there's also a different language thing here. Things going to be more difficult to operate in. Mexico is under the jurisdiction of the Americans to a large extent. The Mexicans can't go and have their own thing without the Americans' approval. It has been a lagging economy for quite some time. There's instability with regards to the drug dealership and so on. But I would suggest that Mexico is probably going to be a more safer option than somewhere like Mauritius or even Malaysia. Okay, the reason being is it's basically under the shadow of the Americans, and that's one thing. But here comes the crappy part. You really, really don't want to be under the shadow of the Americans. As a financial investment kind of like situation, having anything to do with Americans makes it much more difficult to operate. Why? Because the Americans have a weird tax system. That tax system operates off citizenship, not where you live. If I, as a South African, was to go to London, live there for 10 years, make money there, I don't have to care about paying South African taxes anymore if I don't come back to this country for more than half the year. Okay? If I go live in London and just basically make a life there, I hold my citizenship in South Africa, but I've got like residency or whatever it is in London. I pay taxes in London. I do not pay them in South Africa. Okay? That is not true for an American. Doesn't matter where in the world an American lives in, he pays American taxes. Sometimes if they have no agreement with the country he's living in, he pays double taxes. He pays taxes in the country he lives in, and then he pays the American taxes as well. Okay? And in order to enforce a system like this here, because the Americans also have one of the largest, or the largest banking thing. That means the reserve currency of the world. Remember, FIFA got taken down. Those guys like Sepp Blatter and so on got taken down because they were dealing with dollars. And anything deals with dollars falls on the American system, and that caused them to basically be allowed to be investigated by the Americans. Okay, so if you're in Mexico because you're under the American system or close enough to it, you're probably going to have some issues dealing with the American system, and that's going to cause more difficulties for your life. The safest place to be is in Europe. And compared to places like Mexico and Canada, it's also significantly easier to be in Europe than to be in either Mexico or to be in Canada. Okay, does it make sense? Cool. So, any other questions coming through? Where in Europe? I prefer Switzerland, like I said, but Northern Europe seems to be safer. Southern Europe has more issues with regards to fiscal responsibility, let me say. I mean, you've heard about those countries, the pigs, Portugal, Italy, Greece, Spain. I mean, that was an acronym that was like in the past. Those countries basically in Southern Europe, for whatever reason, are net takers from Europe and have a worse fiscal situation than Northern Europeans. Maybe it's just, some people would say it's a snow thing. If you live in a country with snow, you can't afford to mess around with planning. If you don't plan for winter, you die. So maybe over history, those places basically turn out to be better planners because they had to deal with snow. And the guys in the sunny things, you don't have to plan as badly because things that bad, you're going to sleep on the ocean by the sea and it's warm enough and blah, blah, blah. But for whatever reason, Northern Europe is safer, more stable than Southern Europe. It's kind of weird. Going back in history, and Northern Europe had nothing. I mean, Southern Europe, everything was Greece, it was Rome, it was all those. Italy was like, the Renaissance, all this stuff happened in the south. But in recent times, for whatever reason, the north is just more stable, more secure, and I prefer Northern European jurisdiction to the southern. I prefer, by the way, as the Swiss to the European Union as a whole, by the way. The reason being is that the European Union as a whole has more important things to worry about than just its financial sector. What I mean by that, you've seen what's happening right now with regards to the oil market, the energy market. There's intervention on a scale that you can't imagine, what's happening right now. Why? Because these European countries want to make sure that they don't have freezing people over winter. Okay, simple. They don't want to have the people die. They want people to basically have enough money to afford to heat their houses in winter. But in order to do that, they have gone out and they've totally destroyed whole bunches of a whole significant market out there, which is the energy market, the futures market in energy. It's totally messed up. Okay, so yeah, I would suggest that if you can, Northern Europe, but preferably Switzerland. Why? It's separate enough from the EU to be insulated from that. It's wealthy enough that it doesn't have to worry about all the stuff that happens in terms of the poorer EU countries, and also it's not going to be on the line for things like, for instance, like a Greece or a Italian issue at the moment. And at the same time, it depends enough on that financial system that it's not going to mess around with it. And you may think, oh, Viv, you might be talking a little extreme out there. Listen to what I think the head of the EU Parliament recently said about Italy. Okay, Italians invested elected a new leader. Okay, a woman called Meloni. She's considered to be rather right wing. Okay, apparently her party was the party that was created after Mussolini's party was banned after the end of World War II. Kind of like, imagine if the Nazi party was banned in Germany and a party was created to get the remnants of those guys up there, and now it won the election in Germany. That's kind of what's happened here. Okay, there's obviously differences between Hitler and Mussolini, but leave that aside, it's a fascist background. Anyway, the European Parliament is saying that they have tools, okay, to deal with Italy should they go in the wrong path. What are these tools? Well, the European Parliament has recently made changes to how to sanction or to punish European members that don't follow the rules of the Parliament. In the past, you needed a universal agreement among all members, except for the member under sanction, that there should be a punishment. The problem with that was that Hungary and Poland got together and made an agreement between the two of them that if Hungary was in trouble, Poland would always vote against it. If Poland was in trouble, Hungary would always vote against it. That means there could never be any sanctions against either Hungary or Poland, because each of them would be the bloc, the veto. The rules have changed so that now you don't need to have basically agreement for everyone. All you need is agreement among countries that represent 55% of the total members and 65% of the population. That means that Europe is becoming a lot more, fractious, because you're going to find places like Italy, Spain, Greece, the Czech Republic, basically anywhere besides Germany, France, and those kind of countries around them, under a lot of pressure when it comes to basically following EU rules around fiscal policy, around sanctions, and all those kind of things, making it much more fractious, making the chance for possible, like Brexit happened with some of these EU members, possible. And that could be quite difficult to operate in. And if that does happen, I'm about to end, don't worry. If that does happen, if there was, for instance, a split between Northern Europe and Southern Europe, and so there's a North Euro and there's a South Euro in terms of a new currency because there's a split, I expect the Southern Euro to fall and I expect the Northern Euro to rise. Because, like I said, the Northern Euro is the northern countries which at the moment seem to be more fiscally responsible and more stable, and the Southern Euro seems to be the countries that are less fiscally responsible and less stable. And again, nothing to say about what, the peoples are. In fact, if you look at it, for instance, when Italy entered the Eurozone, it was one of the richest countries in Europe per capita. It's fallen dramatically since then. So the Euro has not been great for it. But that's just something to keep in mind. Okay. I think we're about to end. Any other questions? Okay. So like I said, if you want to open an account offshore, give us a shout. It's viv@ransfus.com. Contact via the site that you booked this thing on as well. info@ransfus can be done. Just ask for me and ask, say I want to open an offshore account, and that'll happen. But we can get these things open really quickly. We've actually streamlined our processes because of the difficulties we faced in the last few months. So we now have the ability to open the accounts almost on our own. We're just going to send the stuff over to Switzerland, and if they can trust us, it gets done really quickly. So we basically open all accounts that clients aren't one, and we do it in a really quick time at the moment. So if you want to do it, get in touch with us right now, and we'll have these accounts open for you as quickly as possible. We're going to do some offshore transfers. Again, we offer you offshore transfers as well. You can do one now for $1 million for a person, so husband and wife for $1 million apiece, and do another one basically come through in next year. And we also do, for instance, tax clearances as well. But just be aware, tax clearances are a bit more difficult to get at the moment for whatever reason. Thanks, Andrew. Okay, cheers, guys. Hope you enjoyed this. We'll put this up on YouTube as well. If you have any friends that are interested in learning more about this kind of stuff, feel free to go and ask them to check out our YouTube channel. Is Ransfus on YouTube. We have a weekly podcast I do, just about 10-15 minutes or so, where I talk about what happened in the world and why that happened. And yeah, we also have a lot of stuff from other guys. Christo does stuff. Gary does a lot of stuff. Jaco has done some stuff on wolves recently that's interesting. So go have a look at those things as well. And cheers. Thanks for coming through.